it got me thinking about why Nick Saban was a terrible NFL coach.
Okay.
So Nick Saban, former coach.
Welcome to Cult Favorite, the podcast that always keeps the room at a cool and comfortable temperature. I'm Miranda Simmons.
And I'm Mike Altman. Yeah,
temperature regulation is important.
Especially in Alabama in May.
Especially if you're going to do yoga.
Yeah, we are two religious studies professors trying to understand all of these cult documentaries that you can't stop binge watching. And before we get to our documentary, if you want to help support the show and help more people find us, you can follow us on social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, videos on YouTube. Also, I wanted to give a quick shout out to my Aunt Donna, who I found out is a listener.
Aw.
So, hello, Aunt Donna.
Hi, Aunt Donna.
I hope you're
Where's
still
Aunt
listening.
Donna?
Georgia. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
now that we have a visual medium, I do feel a little like Great British Baking Show because of we're doing it. We've plowed through a couple of episodes today.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I would notice something like that. I'd be like,
they had that on last time.
Yeah. Do academics just wear the same thing all summer?
We should. Well, we should do it like this is how they
I kind of do.
Like on those reality shows, they always do their confession videos in the same outfits so that they can.
I learned that from you.
Splice them together. Yeah. Yeah. And I find that fascinating, especially like, yeah. Anyways,
we'll do like an outtake later. You can tell me why you find that fascinating.
I just find it hard. Like when I watch Drag Race and they're all wearing they look exactly the same the whole season. I'm like, that's a lot of work to look exactly the same, coming out of whatever they were wearing,
right,
into that outfit,
right,
and back and forth to these. Like, I don't know how they structure the day. Like, I'm fast. Like, I just want to. I want to know more about how the
mechanics of time.
Yeah,
sure.
That's the logistics. When we talked about the Duggars, those logistics those are the logistics.
Those are the ones that keep you up.
Yeah.
We're talking Bikram,
Yogi,
Guru. Let's do it together. Predator.
Yeah.
Netflix 2019.
So I didn't know this had been out for this long,
but there's a content warning you should give.
Yes, content warning. There'll be discussions of sexual assault. That's the Predator part of the subtitle.
Correct.
But what did you know about this?
I mean, situation? I knew about hot yoga.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it. Like, I knew about hot yoga. Which, as an idea, like, kind of appealed to me. I'm a Floridian. Yeah. I like a sauna.
Uh-huh.
I like taking a walk in the dead of summer in Alabama. And so it made like some sense to me of like, yeah, yoga in 100 degrees, 100%.
Yeah.
I'm never quite disciplined enough to like, I'll try to like incorporate yoga. I'll do like okay, I'm going to do a 30-day challenge or whatever. I always get to day 3. That's kind of what
day 3 and then you're done.
My relationship.
Are you like going somewhere or just like on an app? Like.
No, I'll do like the, like yoga with Adrienne or whatever online.
Okay. Online. Okay.
She's great.
Okay.
She has a dog that like comes and hangs.
Yeah.
I like her voice a lot.
Okay.
So like, I don't know. I feel like yoga has become one of those things now in like the societal water we swim in, where you have like sort of like, I should really drink more water. It's like, I should really do yoga. Like, it's become that kind of.
I like threw my back out for a week doing yoga with my partner one time, like recently. I was like, because like she does it more frequently. She has like an app on her phone.
Okay.
And I was like, just whatever. It was like we were going to go on a run, but it was raining. And so I was like, we'll do yoga, whatever. Just whatever you normally do. Did not go well for me.
That's sweet that you tried to do like a little couple session for yoga.
Yeah. But it was
threw your back out.
Threw my back out for like a week.
So anyway, I have like a I don't do yoga, but yeah, hot yoga as an idea has made sense in my brain. And I did not know that this is the person who like introduced not only, arguably yoga as a kind of popular thing into the US, but hot yoga specifically.
Hot yoga. Yeah.
Yes. I did not know that Bikram was that guy. So, fun fact, I looked this up. Eva Orner, who directed the documentary and made it, is also the director of the Brandy Hellville and the Cult of Fast Fashion documentary, which, I'm a big fan of.
Yeah.
I have questions about this one.
On
a production level.
We should talk about that because I did not, until I saw your notes today, did not know that. And then that prompted a number of comparative thoughts in my head about what's going on here.
Cool. Well, what did you know about Bikram and or yoga?
I knew about...
Besides it's bad for your back.
Besides apparently. Not to do whatever. So I knew about Bikram as one of the key like popularizers and branders of like modern modern postural yoga, which is like that's the phrase that a lot of yoga scholars
postural yoga
will talk to differentiate
like as opposed to what.
So as opposed to just yoga that's like breathing, because the word yoga can have a variety of meanings in sort of the Hindu context.
Okay.
And the fact that when we think of yoga, we think of like these certain poses is a very recent thing. And that's what's been known as kind of modern postural yoga. So like even the first yoga that came to the US, like Swami Vivekananda in the 1890s, early 1900s, his book called Raja Yoga that was really popular was all breathing techniques. It wasn't. And in fact, he was like, no, the postural, like what's called Hatha yoga, which is the postural yoga. It's like, no, that's bad for you. That's bad stuff. Don't do that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's a shift from a kind of meditative breathing yoga to like, and Bikram is like part of that shift.
Okay.
And part of how that happens.
26 poses, 2 breathing exercises was his jam.
Yeah. So, all right. 5-minute synopsis. This is a short documentary.
We need to stop saying 5 minute. We just need to, how like Julia Child says that like, if you make a cake and it falls, you've made a trifle. You know what I mean? You've made a pudding or whatever.
Right, yeah.
I think we just need to like own the fact that our synopsis is not a 5-minute segment. And that's okay, Mike.
Calling it that. Anyways.
Or that, sure. That's how you throw it back out. That's how you throw it back out, is you're just going to push on through, even if it's not working.
That is probably, No, I'm seeing a pattern in my decision making. All right. Synopsis, in case you haven't watched this yet.
Go.
So what does it cover? It's the rise of Bikram yoga in America and around the world from the 20th century to the 2010s. And then Bikram's sexual assault and harassment of students in his teacher training program and his eventual fleeing the United States. What doesn't get covered? Okay. No one ever uses the word cult.
So why did you want to, this was your pick. Why did you want to watch it?
I assumed someone would use the word cult.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I thought because I knew of other, well, we had the Yogi Bhajan.
Sure.
Right. One there, I knew there's stuff in like other yoga groups. I mean, we have the phrase yoga cult that you see places. So I just assumed.
And there's abuse.
And there's, and so it said predator in it. And
charismatic leader plus.
Yeah. I assumed that we would get there, but we didn't, which is interesting. We can talk about that.
Well, the religious element isn't really a part of, it doesn't come up a ton, does it?
Ooh. Yeah.
We'll talk about it. I'm taking you away from your synopsis, as I do.
You're skipping straight to my takeaway.
Apologies. Okay.
And then let's see what else isn't covered. You had a note here about famous people.
Can I make it? Can I make a quick note?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, maybe it warrants being said. Maybe it's not. I listen. So there is a, that ESPN 30 for 30 series.
We're on that soon.
So
right?
they have a podcast, which I did not know. And they have a podcast series inside of that 30 for 30 domain about Bikram.
Oh. Okay.
And it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Like, if you want more information than this documentary gives, that'll take you through it a little bit more. But like, one of the things that is not in this documentary that they do talk about is how many celebrities helped put him on the map.
Yeah.
And his involvement with like LA celebrity culture in general. Yeah. Shirley MacLaine was apparently an early and really like important student of his. She connected him with like a lot of the like late night circuits, American pop culture stuff that then introduced him to other celebrity clientele. And so like Raquel Welch, he actually had a lawsuit with her because he sued her for copyright infringement when she did a like workout thing that was basically Bikram yoga.
We should talk about the copyright thing. That's interesting.
John McEnroe went to a class or two.
Wow.
Quincy Jones.
Okay.
Candace Bergen. Martin Sheen. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Loretta Swit.
I cannot imagine.
AKA Hot Lips Houlihan from MASH. And Keira DeLay, who's, 2001. Justine and Jason Bateman as kids.
Well,
like
we saw Jason Bateman in the documentary talking about this.
No. What?
Yeah, Jason Bateman's in the documentary in a clip where he's talking about doing hot yoga. It's like he's on a talk show.
How did I miss this?
Yeah, he talked about how hot it was.
What? Oh, yes. Now it's coming back to me. Yes. Right. He's on late night talking about it. Yes. Okay. Oh my gosh. I was like, wait.
Not in the thing, on the show. Yeah.
I don't know.
He's on some show talking about it.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So there were a lot of celebrity, influencers before the internet that like really helped Bikram's trajectory become what it became.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned that a little bit, but I don't think the full depth of it gets pulled out.
Anyway.
I will also say, okay, I feel like I need to give a quick, just quick couple minutes on like yoga as a thing.
Ooh, please do.
So
I love it when you have like a little micro course lecture
moment. All right. Yes. So if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're not, why aren't you? Just turn it on and walk away. This book, Mark Singleton's book, Yoga Body, it came out in 2010. So it came out before all of the shenanigans at the end of this documentary, or the sort of the real news broke about all the allegations.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is it gives you sort of the prehistory up to Bikram. So it actually does include a whole chapter on Ghosh, who comes up in the documentary as his Vishnu Charan Ghosh, who is sort of the teacher that teaches Bikram, but Ghosh also teaches a ton of people. And you get a hint of this in Bikram's story about weightlifting. So like what we think of as modern postural yoga, this is the phrase lots of Singleton and other people who study this use.
Okay.
It emerges out of the late 19th century when the British are in control of India. You have a real emphasis on kind of Christian masculinity in this period. You have a lot of sort of physical culture, the beginnings of bodybuilding, Swedish gymnastics, which are built around these specific kind of poses and body weight movements. So all of this is happening, and things like the Boy Scouts and the YMCA are bringing this to India under kind of British Christian mission stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the argument is that like Europeans are physically superior and more masculine because of their kind of strength than sort of effeminate Hindu Indians. And so there has been a long tradition of yoga. Yoga means lots of things. We don't have time. I'm not going to get all that. But and Singleton sort of lays all of this out. What happens is, in response to this, a number of Indian figures get involved in the physical culture movement, get involved in bodybuilding, weightlifting, and they start to draw on some of the same stuff in physical culture, but then putting these Sanskrit terms on top of it. So like the asanas or the poses, there's sort of a mix of what you see happening in European gymnastics and Swedish gymnastics and physical culture with this, with ideas taken out of sort of Indian religious context and sort of put together as a kind of form of Hindu masculinity and sort of Hindu nationalism. There's a whole other interesting piece of this about sort of these traveling yogi fighters who the British were constantly trying to put down all this period. But so Ghosh in Singleton's telling is where all of this sort of like his whole list of poses is where this sort of all gets codified. And then he
and his poses arguably are what, like, this is what someone says in the documentary are what Bikram really like kind of stole.
Bikram takes 26 of like the 300 or 400 of whatever that Ghosh has, puts them in a cycle.
Okay. And I thought it was like Ghosh had 26, Bikram took 26, and then sued Raquel Welch for having 26.
Ghosh has a ton.
Okay.
Yeah. And Ghosh's brother, we were talking about this before we recorded, was Yogananda, who also brought his own kind of yoga to the United States in the 20s and 30s. Very different than the kind of postures we're doing now. There's this interesting story there about these two brothers. So like all that is to say is when Bikram brings this over in the 70s, and then as it grows in popularity to the 90s, early 2000s, you have this pushback from Hindu Americans who are like, oh, yoga's become this white thing. It's actually a Hindu thing, blah,
like
blah, blah.
Appropriated.
But like, and that claim is what it is. But there's also this history that shows that actually the thing that we think of as yoga now
has its own colonial
a hybrid
origins.
From the beginning, as all things are, of course.
Sure.
But does not go all the way back to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and Sanskrit.
Right.
So I think it's the way that Bikram is able to sort of like take this thing that was already connected to the beginnings of Western physical fitness culture.
Yeah.
And then pull it back over here, brand it, tried to copyright it.
Yes.
Was told, no, you can't copyright poses by the federal government.
Oh.
And lost his copyright case on it.
Huh.
Because he sued a former student who opened up their own, who went on
Interesting.
Their own.
Oh, right. But his suit against Raquel Welch was apparently successful. Yeah. And that's part of where his like early wealth came from. I don't know how much she had to pay him, but that was like, what bought his house in Beverly Hills. But
the federal copyright office came out and said, no, you cannot copyright poses. So, which I think is interesting in the background.
Super interesting.
Of all these people who feel like they have to go to Bikram when this is available from lots of sources, right? So there's a whole thing there. So anyways, that's my yoga thing. Singleton's book, it's interesting because it's not the easiest read, but it's good.
Well, the image, when I saw it sitting here, I was like, ooh, yay, Mike has a prop. And then I thought like, he must really be in, like, I thought that maybe you were like into practicing yoga. Cause like the image itself looks very, this is how to get a yoga body.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
No,
like it looks,
yeah, it is. It is very much that vibe.
Show the viewers at home.
I don't know what, it's an Oxford OUP book. And if they have, sometimes the amount of control you get over those
images
anyway. Is who knows what. Okay. So what happens to the documentary? It's a nice, less than an hour and a half, 3-part, very classic 3-act play. Act 1, we are introduced to Bikram Choudhury, the founder of Bikram Yoga, born in Calcutta. Should say also Calcutta is the place where all of this is. A lot of this is happening in India in the period. In 1944, studied under Vishnu Charan Ghosh, the sort of what I call the godfather of modern postural yoga. And then before he turned to yoga, he was a bodybuilder. So there's this like self-style biography we get. It's a very interesting move because they open it with this sort of the sort of myth of Bikram as told by Bikram.
As told by Bikram is very important there.
And then by the end of the documentary, everything that it's sort of been deflated at that point.
Yeah. And it was like he was into yoga, then he did bodybuilding, then he came back to yoga. Right.
Yeah. And because of this bodybuilding accident that he shattered his leg and they were going to amputate it, but then he did yoga and lost the muscles to get thinner. And then,
and it like fixed his knee.
Yeah. And then once, in America, he he says in July 4th, 1972, he was brought to President Nixon to help him heal his leg. There is absolutely no evidence that this ever happened. But apparently he claimed he healed Nixon, and as out of gratitude, Nixon gave him a green card.
Right.
Again, no one's ever been able to verify any of that. He opens a yoga school in LA. And I think this is where this is the piece that is kind of missing. We don't get that whole story of how he becomes so popular. But by the 1990s, he's teaching celebrities and he's franchising Bikram Yoga through a system of sort of teacher trainings that train new yoga teachers to open Bikram schools around the country. He has a system of 26 postures, 2 breathing techniques taken from the larger body of Ghosh's work. He also added his innovation was the idea of turning up the heat really high,
like 105 degrees,
which he said originally was to simulate the climate of India.
Yes. That happened to another thing that I learned in the 30 for 30 podcast was that like he did this while he was in Japan because the climate was so different.
Yeah.
And one of the ways to like
he had some stopover in Japan before it came to the US apparently. And he's gone back to Japan. Been on the run. And then this became known as hot yoga. And so the yoga was like very physically demanding, but also very popular. Especially in the 90s into the 2000s as sort of larger American interest in yoga kind of took off. He's not the only person who had a unique postural yoga, but it's one of the ones that he just was, because of his LA base, able to brand really well. Act 2, all of the problems with Bikram's yoga empire and his teacher trainings in particular. So these trainings were 9 weeks in a hotel with hundreds of students who were all there.
Like $10,000 to $15,000 is what they cost.
Yes. And they were there the whole time in this hotel doing yoga in this big ballroom with the heat turned up super high while Bikram had his own personal air conditioner. Sleep deprived, physically exhausted, isolated together. And then within these classes, Bikram, both the teacher trainings and just his regular classes, was known as this sort of rough, abusive, sort of mean, but in that way, like it's that kind of like you want a trainer who's an asshole kind of situation, but more than that,
super crass, insulted people's bodies. One of the things that this was like attractive to celebrities in part because they're like used to being catered to all the time. And this was like a place that they could go where someone would like really kick their ass and say like, and it felt like, something was really happening that way.
Coddled as a celebrity, it's nice to have this man yell at you and call you names. Yeah. And part of it was the idea of sort of tearing them down so we could build them back up again. There's all these, so we get all these stories from former Bikram teachers who about more than just verbal abuse in the teacher training. Students recount being sexually harassed, being asked or coerced into giving Bikram massages. It's always massages with the yoga people. Called to his hotel room at all hours of the night where he would put on Bollywood movies and make passes at them. And then eventually actual sexual assault and rape.
Right.
And there's this idea that the teachers wanted, who are, when you look at it's majority women in these rooms. It's mostly like women under 40, and then there are a few men involved, but we hear from only a couple. The teachers wanted to become yoga teachers, and they felt like they could only do that through Bikram because he has this system. So if you want the hot yoga, you want the system. If you have this thing, the Raquel Welch thing is interesting because it makes it even clearer. Like, this is his. If you want access to this, for sure, this is where you get it.
And you had to have like a letter from, so it wasn't just about. So you would be in your own yoga studio, taking a class. You'd be like, "This is great." The teacher would single you out of like, "Hey, you've got some talent. You should think about teacher training." The teacher had to give like that studio owner had to write like a letter of recommendation as you applied for teacher training. Like it was this whole process, but it was very much centered through him. Like to become a teacher of this kind of yoga, you did have to go through him.
Yeah. We'll talk about it. That's what I think is really interesting about this thing. Yeah. So as one student, who had been assaulted said, if you want to advance the Bikram, you had to go back for teaching. So Act 3, it sort of shifts when Sarah Bond, a Bikram teacher, sues Bikram for sexual assault in 2013. A number of other students sue, and this opens up this kind of rift within the Bikram yoga community between those who side with Bikram and those who side with the women. And there's a number of sort of lawsuits coming at Bikram. And then we hear from Mickey Jaffa Bowden, who was his sort of like, not lawyer, they say like legal aid or something like that, who was basically trying to help him, I think, negotiate, like get through all of this. And she eventually goes to Bikram's wife and says he needs to be taken out of power or the whole business is going to fall apart. And the wife tells Bikram, and Bikram fires Mickey and then basically tries to ruin her life by kind of repossessing and taking away all of the things he had given her that she was able, in her life. And then she sues and hires...
For like wrongful termination, sexual harassment. Yeah.
And hires Carla Menard, who becomes the kind of narrator for this last third of the documentary, who is a remarkable attorney who gets Mickey to agree to not ever settle.
Yeah.
And like,
it was like, I will only take the case
if you take
under
this
the condition.
Court,
yeah.
If you,
that was interesting.
And this means that they then get to depose
Yes.
Bikram. They get all of this discovery, and in the depositions, they have the videotape in the documentary. Bikram's just losing his mind. My favorite, like even on the stand in the trial, I didn't put this in my notes. It's in my other one, but it's like there's the trial attorney who was working with Menard tells the story about like asking him, what was it about? Where do you got? He says he has no money. And he says, like, why do you have no money? Or why do you have these cars? Well, I gave the cars to the state of California.
Right.
Why did you give them to the state of California? Well, the governor, Jerry Brown, said I had a deal. Well, what was the deal? He's going to build a school in my name. Well, what's the school? And he goes, like, the Bikram School for Children Engineers who want to build cars or something like this. It was just this clear
he had
sense
stories to tell.
that he's got,
and
he's a worker. So Mickey wins the case and a $7.5 million in damages in 2016. Bikram, quote unquote, divorces his wife. Many people think this is a sham divorce, but what it does is she gets all the assets in the divorce, which means that
they can't be seized.
Yeah. And then he flees the country, and no one can get him to pay while he's out of the country. There have been no criminal charges filed against him, mostly because it seems like the LA District Attorney's Office just doesn't want to deal with this.
Menard has feelings about that.
Yes, she has very strong feelings about that. And by the end of the documentary, which was, I think, probably completed in 2018 and came out in 2019, Bikram is doing teacher trainings in Mexico and Spain. There were 6 civil cases filed against him. 4 of them settled once they realized there was no way they were going to get any money, any real money in court.
Or criminal proceedings. Yeah.
And I did a quick Google search, and this year, Bikram is holding teaching trainings this year in Thailand.
No kidding.
For $10,000 to $12,000, depending on whether
he's like 81 now or something.
They're happening.
Wow.
So yeah, there's you can sign up. There was one, I think, in April, and there's another one in the fall.
Phew.
That's the story.
That was 5 minutes. Wow.
It was a short one though. It wasn't like multiple episodes.
Well,
it was very compact little.
It is compact, and that's one of the things that I guess I found interesting, because the Brandy Hellville documentary, I thought it did a really good job of telling this specific story by way of, or telling the story of a large structural phenomenon by way of a specific story,
right.
I guess.
Yeah.
Like a specific experience. So this one had the specific story without that like larger structural context. And so I'm interested maybe in what, like, I don't know, in what you have to say about like, what is a larger structural story to tell? Is it to do with these, the Mark Singleton book, I don't know, like is there a larger story to tell? And if there is, what is that thing? Because I don't, well, anyway, so, but we can come back to that. I think that there was something really interesting about the apparent like appeal of the verbal abuse, just unabashed verbal abuse through these trainings and classes, like his crass mode of belittling people. Like there was already one of the things that Mickey, his legal aid, was talking about was like part of the problem with these allegations coming out was that they were already tied up in a legal case that came from someone who took one of his classes and was like, this is not okay. Right. You're hurling like racial slurs and like body shaming and all of these epithets through class. And that's not all right. But she was very much an outlier in as much as so many people who came to his classes felt like that was part of the appeal. And so I'm interested in like the market or context that makes that compelling. I don't know if that's part of a bigger story to tell, or maybe that's something else entirely. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's about like, there's something about anything that we think of as being part of kind of like the fitness world that like we make space for that. Like there are these certain places, right? Like, you know, if you have like we
CrossFit,
Iron
Tribe,
or just
like
football
stuff that's
coaches, like any number of things where like, you know, like you don't, it's not, no one raises an eyebrow. Like every once in a while, there'll be some video that surfaces from some college football team's practice and you hear some coach, you know, like motherfucking all the players and like no one raises an eyebrow, right? Like that's what's expected.
And they're also really steeped in super conventional and super problematic ideas of body type, of body ideals, of
and so you have that piece of it. I was thinking too about like the oh shoot, what's his name? The British chef who has the show,
Gordon Ramsay,
right?
Yeah.
So there's something about these
Hell's Kitchen.
Yes, Hell's Kitchen. There we go.
I've not watched it, but
I've watched it in the past years ago. But but like
that's part of his like
that's part of his shtick is he just calls people donkeys and yells at them and blah blah blah, right?
Yeah.
And there is a kind of American cultural idea that like if in order to reach this certain kind of like height of excellence, it requires a kind of like, it's so hard to get there that you have to go through some level of abuse almost, or they don't want to say abuse, but hard work, whatever.
You do it through punishment, like through self-punishment. It's like a boot camp kind of thing.
Yeah, it's this very kind of ascetic, like you have to get through this to get to there, and then that's going to make you better. And no matter what they're actually saying to you, they're doing it for your own good.
Pain is weakness leaving your body.
Yes, exactly.
Ugh.
You know, yeah, I mean, and like that has taken off all over the place in our society.
And not even in just the physical world. Like there is a kind of cachet to like the politically incorrect, tough talker who's telling it like it is, you know? And this happens in like motivational.
Oh yeah. But
culture, I don't know.
And then the racial and cultural difference of Bikram as an Indian man also, I think, makes space for this too, because we have this idea of he's this sort of outsider who doesn't have to like comply. Doesn't have to comply. It gives him a whole different sort of rule set, and I think he plays on that a lot, right? I think like, you know, and I think just looking like he did and having the accent that he did gives him a sense of ability to sort of break social boundaries that others might not get away with. Like,
maybe,
I mean, if you think about like Guru Jagat and like had a similar, you know, harsh approach and verbally abusive. And I think it was looked at much differently overall than in this case. You know, and I think, so there's an interesting way that
part of her appeal, interestingly, like she was very down to earth and she would swear and she was funny. And so there was that kind of, so in the trainings themselves, she was very like, I don't know, like cool friend that you want to hang out with. And so she broke that sort of stereotype.
She was with this sort of like manic pixie dream girl Yogi.
Yeah. But then like, of course, behind the scenes, she was just like berating people.
Yeah.
But
or even someone like Mark Driscoll, who ironically, I think has a whole spiel about yoga based on a Bikram class he went to.
Really? Tell the people who Mark Driscoll is.
So Mark Driscoll is, why is there not, there's a podcast documentary series, but I was going to film it against him. He was the pastor who founded Mars Hill Church in Seattle, which was he was known as the swearing pastor. Big, actually about the same time, big in the 2010s is when he started to have his downfall.
And this is also though, like part of a kind of like offshoot of evangelical Christianity that was really overtly attempting to like masculinize the church, right? That like our ideas of Jesus Christ have become far too feminized, far too...
our worship music is too much about Jesus as our boyfriend.
We're emphasizing like his gentleness and his like servant heart instead of like the tough, take no prisoners,
they were
kind
like,
of uncompromising.
Really, and they're really into like Calvinist theology too. So like really into like a kind of a specific kind of of evangelical theology that likes to think of itself as the very serious and intellectual.
But wait, Mark Driscoll took a Bikram yoga class?
Apparently, yes. There's a whole sermon he did on yoga, I think based on having gone to a Bikram class and then writing about how yoga is of the devil or whatever.
Why did he end up? I mean, was he like going undercover? Like, was
no,
it?
I think
to,
he just was like went, and then I think it was. I don't know the full story, but
okay, this is a rabbit hole that this is like a little breadcrumb that you're dropping.
If you go on YouTube, there is
listeners.
a sermon from Mark Driscoll about yoga and how it opens you up to Satan, and I believe is based.
Someone needs to go down that rabbit hole because I categorically refuse to do so. I am not interested in hearing that sermon, but I'm interested in what he has to say about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's just one of those things where Driscoll, But
there's an interesting, so inside of like yoga's rise as a societal phenomenon and this, enormous profit machine inside the US, Madonna starts doing it in the early aughts where she she's not doing weights anymore. All she's doing is Ashtanga yoga, I think was her brand. Anyway, that was, it's an interesting, I don't know, like even inside of yoga, but also inside of just like wellness culture more broadly, the rhetoric of like giving yourself permission or being gentle with yourself or like I don't know. It's just an interesting juxtaposition. This kind of like inside of that space, this figure who is like just unapologetically like insulting you and how your body looks and what your poses are like is maybe some way to have your cake and eat it too or something. Like to be part of, it's happening inside of a wellness space where it's ultimately for my good, like you were saying. Yeah. But there's this sort of punishing way of getting to it that makes it feel more honest or something.
It is not like there are plenty of things that are very hard to do that require that it is having a coach or a mentor who is pushing you past what you think is your limit.
Sure.
Makes sense. Right.
Sure.
And so those relationships and the trust required for that to happen, I think are very real and can be very good in a lot of ways. I think what's interesting here is the way but those same relationships are also ripe for abuse when they go awry, like when that trust is broken. And I don't think that means we should never have I think there's probably a place where if you're trying to reach the heights of your sort of physical achievement or athletic achievement, you might get yelled at and that might be good for you. but I think the right person would know when it's the right time to yell at you or not.
Well, it's no accident that discipline means like a devotion to a task.
Yeah.
And also,
right. Yes.
potentially,
yes. Yeah.
You know, a way of punishing someone.
Yeah.
For any. I don't know.
No, I think that, but all that is to say, like,
yeah,
I think you're right. I think that there's lots of places where we let people have this sort of this sort of verbal abuse, but I think there's a piece of it where, it just it falls apart.
Yeah. But interestingly, like you said, even though, so there's this really conventional trajectory of like cult documentary or cult, like narrative where my knees hurt and my scoliosis, like there were people who talked about like my spine was twisted and I was told I couldn't do this or that, but then I did yoga and like it fixed me. Like there's a reason that people get brought in. Yoga makes them feel better. So then they feel very evangelical about it and want to bring other people, they want to share it with people. They feel devoted to this charismatic leader who has stories to tell and likes to hear himself talk. The leader exploits that trust and then, of course, denies wrongdoing. He also has all of these eccentricities that people put up with, like he can't wear green and stuff.
That was going to be my if I had gotten to the document first. That was going to be the podcast where you can't wear green.
Oh, fun. I mean, he just doesn't like the color. Like, and so people can't wear it. Followers can't leave though, because their livelihoods and sense of identity are tied to the group. So that whole thing is played out in a very like beat for beat sort of way, but cult is not mentioned, like you said. So we talked about this with the Duggars too, but like when there is or isn't a decision to bring in a cult expert or someone who is invested in identifying cults or exposing them or whatever, my guess is that it's for a similar reason, like that we don't want to do away with yoga.
Right.
We're not ready to do that.
Yes.
Because yoga is, again, like I'm not invested in yoga, but it still lives in my brain as this, I should drink more water. Yeah. Yeah. Like that I'm not doing it is some kind of physiological failure.
Yeah.
And that, so we are then loath to add cult language to a space that we want to maintain as part of the mainstream.
Yeah.
And so in the same way that like with the Duggars, you have people using cult language, but it's people who were inside of that community who then turned it.
And they seem to want to they need cult to save Christianity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. And so here's how I make meaning of this experience. The fact that we don't call in cult experts to talk about this. Now, maybe the director or producer is just not interested in that aspect of things. Like Brandy Hellville's cult of fast fashion. Like we also don't hear from cult experts about that either.
Right.
But
well, I think that comparison is interesting to me. And if you haven't listened to the Brandy Hellville episode, you go back to this good one.
Sure. Yeah.
But because they're both made by the same person or directed by the same person, I think from one perspective, they're both about the sort of corruptions of capitalism and these brands that are able to take on so much power.
Yes.
Right. So insofar as like the cult is like the brand, right? But fast fashion has these material effects and systems, like all of the clothes that wind up, off the coast of Africa and all of this stuff that we don't have with yoga. Right. I mean, I think
Or there are like specific harms that you can point to as part of this structure with fast fashion that you don't want to be accused of attaching to yoga.
Yeah.
So even if one could make a case of there are structural harms of, I don't know, intersecting profit and marketing mechanisms with physical wellness. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's so much the water that we swim in that we would never call that a harm because it's the water we swim in. Fast fashion is too, except there are people who are upcycling, who are trying to do things to buck that system in a specific way that highlight and foreground the abuses of the system.
Yes.
And I wonder if that's why there's not this larger structural story that Bikram is exemplifying in this telling.
No, I think that's right. And it's because like...
But Bikram is never, like, there's never a person in a vacuum. So I guess that's where then my brain kind of always goes to like, well, so what's the bigger thing? Like this guy is a jerk and he sucks and needs called out.
Right. But what, because at least even with like Brandy Hellville, it's like, it's not like, yes, Brandy Hellville and this particular, CEO and all of the grossness there, but also like Forever 21 and Old Navy and Target and whatever is the same structural problem.
Well, and here's the thing that allows this dude to exist and create a company and be very successful inside, And so what is the thing? Yeah.
What is the thing that allows this to happen? And I think it would have to be, it is, I think, a larger fitness and wellness. It's a larger wellness industry that I think it's harder to like, other than the harms perpetuated by Bikram Choudhury, it is hard to find what the other harms are at the systemic level. And maybe they're...
Well, I guess you would have to identify, like, I don't like being yelled at.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So for me, I might think, because I'm a non-confrontationalist and whatever, like sensitive in the face of verbal abuse.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a documentary that I would watch about like just what is it with this phenomenon of like tough fitness, and why is it that we feel like our health and wellness and fitness levels depend upon that kind of treatment.
Yeah.
What is that relationship about, and where does that stem from, and what is it like? How does that function for us?
Yeah.
Like, I might watch that documentary.
Right.
But I imagine that a lot of people wouldn't, because that's just one person being sensitive or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, that's how we would see it.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's that abuses don't happen. I think it's what someone identifies as abuse is, in the same way that, like, if you're not wanting to pay attention to where your clothes are made, like, life is a little easier.
Yeah.
And definitely a little cheaper, a lot cheaper, and so some people literally can't afford to pay that kind of attention.
Yeah.
And so there is a, I guess, analog for me about what kind of things we identify and classify as harm in the first place. That, because obviously, like, harassment and abuse is harm.
Yeah.
Like, obviously rape is harm.
Yeah.
So here's the story of an alleged rapist who is on the hook for almost $8 million in damages, who flies the coop and is still like that is a story.
I think what it needed was more about why there are people who still back him, right? Like they changed the name from Bikram to Hot Yoga and all this stuff, but like there's still people. Like there were pictures even at the end of this documentary of Spain and Mexico full of people, and there are people who are still by the end. There's the one woman who's sort of never. She says, I only like this yoga is magical, and says, it works. It's effective.
Sure. And
that's the only reason I agreed to speak with you. Like she's not a former teacher. Like she's still invested.
Well, I think it's that thing of if the IBLP is not Christianity in the Duggars documentary, where the person makes that distinction. I think this is a way of doing that, of like yoga. The man is not the yoga.
Oh,
and that the yoga still has all of these benefits, and I still have my own personal like wellness journey with these results.
Yeah. And it's working for people
yoga.
that I'm teaching, and
100%.
And it's not even like it was his yoga, right? Like even like
sure.
Like that was kind of, he took it from somebody else who put it together. Like it got me thinking about why Nick Saban was a terrible NFL coach.
Okay.
So Nick Saban, former coach of the University of Alabama and LSU, was famously didn't players new ones but was a terrible NFL coach.
No kidding.
So in college,
I don't really know this backstory.
Okay.
Can I admit that?
No, you totally can. So Saban was at LSU, won a national championship there, went to the NFL and coached. Well, he coached a couple places in the NFL, but coached and was a total failure as a NFL coach. And then dropped back down, came to Alabama afterwards.
Right. To like Miami Dolphins?
Yeah,
Is that
the
where
Dolphins.
I
he also coached the Browns at one point.
Okay.
Cleveland Browns. But people will tell you that it's because the aggressive, I control everything, I'm gonna, holler at you when you come off the sideline, works on 18 to 22-year-olds who are not being paid, but does not work with people who are in their 30s and have been doing it for 10 years. Yeah.
Okay.
And they're like, man, I make more money than you do, brother. Like, what are you talking about?
Interesting.
And so it takes a very different kind of coach.
Power dynamic changes.
In the NFL.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I would argue, and others, this is not my argument, but I agree with it, that Saban retired when he did was because players were starting to get paid. And the ability to have that approach to player coaching was going to be short-lived when now you've got players who are actually making, like top players are making, millions of dollars.
They need different reasons to do what you say.
Yeah.
And to trust you
and in the current situation, if you do that and they don't like what you're doing, like what you're saying, they can just transfer and leave. And so it's a whole different kind of model that.
Yes.
And so there's something about like that model of coaching and athletics and fitness and physical culture.
Yeah.
That, works, and that sort of quote unquote works, whatever that means, only in situations that are, I think, pretty exploitative. Like unpaid college football players was exploitative. There's a number of players who career-ending injuries and never got paid for playing professionally.
Yeah.
So I think that to me is, an interesting kind of way that where we think about this is changing. And I think too, one of the reasons that Bikram got away with it for so long, because I can't assume that this wasn't also happening in the 80s and 90s, even if it wasn't coming out till 2010s, but was like, there is always, Amanda Lucia has a great chapter on this in her book, whose title escapes me because I didn't think about it right now. But it is about sort of yoga festivals and things, and sort of this spiritual, the sort of yoga spirituality.
White utopias.
Thank you.
The religious exoticism of transformational festivals.
Yes. And it's a great book. there's a chapter in there though on authority and authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
and she talks about how white yogis, white yoga instructors, white people have a kind of authenticity crisis about taking on this quote unquote Indian, even though it's a mix.
Guru Jagat.
Right.
Yeah.
And that there's sort of two approaches to dealing with that crisis. And one of them is to have an authentic guru who has a lineage that I can point to. And so there's all of the economic reasons that people came back to Bikram.
Mm-hmm.
But his ability to say, I have a system that I got from the Yoga College of Calcutta by the guy that we all know is the guy.
Yeah.
And
you want to study under the guy.
Yeah, I'll give that to you.
Sure.
So even though anyone could have gotten these positions and there are lots of other options, and there's Iyengar yoga and Siddha yoga and all this other stuff, there was an authenticity that came with being a Bikram trained
legitimizes it in a
yogi.
certain way. Yeah.
That was especially important to sort of like white new agey types in a way. The other move to make is to be like, oh, yoga is for everyone. So it's this universal thing in my experience authorized. But I think that was a whole different vibe. So yeah, to me, that was an interesting piece to that. That need for that authenticity.
Yeah. That makes loads of sense.
Do you have a big takeaway? Takeaway?
Are we
there? No.
Are we there? Did you have anything?
I mean, we're there.
We're there. This was a tidy documentary and a tidy conversation. I guess because again, it keeps it in that my takeaway.
You wanted more from this one.
Well, yeah, I guess because I just don't think that any story lives in a vacuum. And while I think that, and so I guess that's my takeaway. I do think that any story is arguably worth telling. And I'm really glad that the women who are alleging harm have a platform to share their stories. Like 100%. I guess with a documentary, I always think a documentary is a story that allows for something. It's about this thing, but it's not really about this thing. Like Hero Dreams of Sushi, great documentary. Love that documentary. It's about this guy's sushi and this craft, except it's really about like fathers and sons and lineage and this documentary, I think, in the vein of a lot of like true crime stuff that we find really fascinating because it's taboo, it's an expose, it's edgy, it's holding someone to account perhaps in a way that we find satisfying. Like there's obviously a place for that. There's obviously a market for that. There's a huge market for that. I just, none of those true crimes live in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And so I think that the takeaway for me is that we should always try to keep our eye on keeping your eye on the ball means looking at the field. I don't know. The metaphor doesn't work. But
I mean, there's a number of scholars of yoga that have done plenty of media in the last 10 years that you would expect that could have been the kind of talking head on that larger context front that we don't get any experts. And
perhaps there are, I don't think that, or at least I would be slow to say. I'm sure that there are examples where this is not the case, but I would be hesitant to say that there is only one bigger story to tell. Right. Like there are, I don't know, 12 different stories that you could tell through the lens of this one thing. But yeah, I just think that we should be mindful about
it seems like
those bigger things.
The filmmakers were not looking for a larger explanation other than this guy's own
sort
of evil.
And whatever. He sucks.
Yeah.
But I mean, I believe the women who are telling their stories, right?
Yeah.
I just, I feel like we run a risk of keeping abuse and the people who perpetrate it as, I don't know, keeping the story about them, somehow amplifying and perpetuating their, maybe not their power per se, but very much like the story is still about him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just
It's
don't
called Bikram.
think that he's about him.
Yeah. That actually kind of like, as much as they try to like, they talk about Nixon at the beginning and all of this, and then at the end, the trial attorney's like, "There's no evidence for this." Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
There's somebody who says, we have
the journalist.
Yes,
right?
we have guys
who
like
talks
him in
about,
North
like,
India. Like,
he's
this
a
is just a
folklorist,
trope.
is what she calls him.
Yeah,
he's a folklorist.
This is a trope. The tall tailing guy from Calcutta is a thing that we all grew up with.
And I guess I think that the bigger hole in the tent is not to like say this person is a personification of whatever kind of exceptional evil, so much as it is to say, dude, this isn't about you.
Right.
Like, this isn't.
Yeah.
It's not. You know what I mean? Like, I think that kind of takes something really particular away from the power that we are attempting to identify and critique and undermine, instead of like allowing for, again, the ways that we like fetishize the very people that we are trying to expose.
Yeah. And I think that for me, the takeaway was about the sort of like the boundaries between like grifter, carny, and cult leader. And kind of coming at what you said from a different direction, which is like, for the documentaries, it seems like cult is a narrative device that can be used or not, right? And these different like, and so it's really more about whether or not the filmmaker chooses to tell the cult story or some other, because like comparing it to Brandy Hellville, it's like, oh, these are both stories of sort of businesses with corrupt leadership and how that works out.
Right.
In that ways, it made me think about the McMahon documentary. If you think about somebody who took a thing that was broadly diffused, branded it really well, built an empire where it all flowed through them, and then out of that empire, had all these abuses. It's kind of the same story in that way. Like, Bikram is the Vince McMahon of yoga.
And in that way, that's part of what I found frustrating about the McMahon documentary, because it was still about McMahon.
Yes.
It was just as much a kind of like, oh my God, this guy, as it was about and so I think it's like, instead of it being about this guy, like I want it, like Sarah, it's about Sarah. Sarah is the person who like first filed suit alleging sexual abuse. And for her to say what she did about like, she only wanted to be a teacher. She went through the training to be a teacher. She became a teacher. By all accounts, she was a very like successful teacher, but then she has a daughter, and her daughter at 3 says, I want to be just like you, mommy. I want to teach yoga. And she says in her mind, you can't, because you'll get raped.
Yeah.
Like, that's a bigger structural story to tell. You know what I mean? And so it's like, and it's about her. It's not about him. But so it is, I understand, like a complicated needle to thread, because in order to expose someone and in order to talk about the damage that someone does, you have to talk about them, like, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think that there are,
I think questions about how, I think if someone had asked, how is it that this Indian man with his particular biography in terms of coming out of Bengal being trained by Ghosh. How is it that this thing that we call yoga goes from being dominated by Indian men in sort of Bengal, that part of India, to white women in Los Angeles?
Right.
That would like that.
That's part of that book that you were just talking about too,
Yeah,
right?
well,
That
that's
kind of
actually
like,
probably more in like Andrea Jane's book on yoga, selling yoga. But I think like that, and there are people who've written about this, but as a documentary question, now we get to see like a lot of those questions about how Bikram even becomes Bikram start to make a lot more sense, right? Like at least in McMahon, we know McMahon became McMahon because he put everybody else out of business, so no one had anywhere else to work.
But then also that it's and then that gets complicated too, of course, because that can so quickly and easily play into all sorts of stereotypes about, white saviordom from the like, sexually violent racial other. So there are all sorts of offshoots and like estuaries of this
pre-Bikram, like Vivekananda in the early 20th century, Yogananda, a lot of these Indian gurus who were not even doing postural yoga, but the majority of their followers early on were women. I mean, and they relied on rich white women for their to fund everything they did in the United States.
Sure.
And so I don't know. This was
a story with the Rajneeshis as well, right?
Yeah.
When he comes over and he like has very clearly a like targeted demographic of like who he wants to recruit.
And I think there's a skillful way to tell that story that doesn't drift into saving white women from brown men.
Yeah.
But that does get at what are the structural
white women's complicity in in power structures.
Why is it that a white woman invested in fitness culture feels like yoga is the only, like, why is yoga the only way? Much less Bikram yoga. Like, there's something like in that story, but I think that's also like really probably much harder to tell in an hour and a half.
And I don't want to be there are lots of different ways to tell a story. This is only one documentary. I don't mean to be like,
it's not the worst thing.
Raking order over the coals. Yeah, no, it's and it's not even a like, I don't know. With that, the only one that I think, is this true? I try to be, I don't like to say, like kind of reader response-y hot take of like good, bad, whatever, except for the, what was it called? How to be a cult leader?
How to be a cult leader.
I hated that one. I thought that one was categorically bad. I thought that it was like really damaging and problematic. But
that was my idea.
As like a media product to put out. But yeah, it just, I don't know. Stories are complicated things. I think, which is why we have this podcast.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to think about it though. This was 2019. And then Brandy Hill was 2024.
Oh, interesting.
So putting it into the larger I'm now wanting to
I like that trajectory.
Deep dive of the biography of Eva Orner, the director. So that would be what would be interesting. I was like, what changed about your way of making films between these two? That'd be a question. If anyone knows Eva Orner,
listen to Mark Driscoll's sermon on yoga, and also give us these are the rabbit holes. These are the assignments.
What's your cult favorite? Thinking of things you do like.
Well, I mean, this is just you mentioned several useful books, and I will put another one on the table that is older. I think it's from the early aughts. I don't know. Check my work, but Selling Spirituality by Jeremy Corrette and Richard King. These are two religious studies professors. It gives also an analysis of, spirituality as a like commodity in the global marketplace. But they have a chapter on Bikram. I mean, they also talk about like feng shui and aromatherapy and stuff, but there's a chapter on that. On Bikram yoga, I believe. But Selling Spirituality is another book to look up.
Yeah.
I will also say though, only very quickly, that has nothing to do with anything necessarily. I'm sure it does, but I haven't really put the connective tissue together. So I will spare us both. But I went and saw Sinners.
Okay.
Have you heard of that movie?
I've heard about this movie.
My gosh. High recommend.
Okay.
5 out of 5 stars. High recommend. I want to see it again and like dig into it a little more.
Okay.
And, I don't know, maybe future self will say, but there are these, I don't know, 10 problematic things.
What's it about?
Well, so many things, Michael.
Okay.
Like, it's a long movie. It's like over 2 hours, but it like puts into the same narrative context, like Jim Crow, race, politics, gangster society, and like, two brothers who come back from Chicago into the deep South to make a juke joint. It's about music and ancestry and also vampires. So you may not think that all of those things can go together, but it's just such an ambitious and really, really, really interesting movie. And so it's one that I'm still thinking about it. And so that is
I've seen it mentioned various places, but I haven't.
That's my cult favorite.
Okay. Go. Yeah. We'll see.
Tuesdays at the Cobb Theater, and you have they do discounts all day. Did you know that?
Yeah. I should just go watch a movie.
It will make you feel like summer's here.
No, there's nothing more summer than I'm going to wait till it gets really hot. And then you go to the ice cold movie theater at like 2 p.m.
And our movie theater sells frozen Cokes.
It does. I love
a
Coke slushy.
I like an icy. Do you call it slushy? I call it icy. Is that a Floridian thing? I don't know. Is that because we had 7-Elevens?
Icy's the right brand. So yeah.
Anyways. Okay. I got off track. Go.
So mine also a film, but The U. It's a 2009 documentary, 30 for 30 ESPN documentary about the rise of the University of Miami football program in the 80s and into the early 90s. And it's about that and how this small private college in Coral Gables, surrounded by the larger city of Miami, how, it starts with the coach, Howard Schellenberger, who comes in and decides to just start recruiting players from Liberty City and Overtown and all these parts of Miami, these that were, in the early 80s. And he vows to win a national championship in 5 years and does it in the 5th year. But how giving these players from Miami, these black players, a platform just changed college football. I think that it's very much, after Schellenberger leaves, this continues with Coach Jimmy Johnson. And one of the biggest rivals that they had was Notre Dame, this lily white Catholic school, of course.
Right.
And it culminates, I think it was in 87. They play each other, and the T-shirts in Notre Dame and the T-shirts they were giving out in South Bend said Catholics versus convicts.
Whoa.
And so you get
gross.
But, it's Two Life Crew was one of their biggest supporters and a big part of what that whole. But they became this representation of a Miami that had number of riots in that time period around police killings of black people.
Right.
So so to your point, it's this documentary about a football program, but it's actually also about race relations in America in this period. The first school to really give black players a kind of public face in a lot of ways, and sort of, and so it's one of. I had heard about it for a long time as one of the great sports documentaries, but I just sat down and started watching it yesterday. And it was,
all right.
So highly recommend if you haven't seen it. Yeah, another 30 for 30. It's on ESPN.
Groovy.
It's also on Netflix, I think, too, because I think they have
access. Netflix, I think, has that franchise.
So it's on there, or if you have the ESPN app, it's on there, too.
Neato.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Subscribe, follow us, find us, tell other people about us. And special thanks to the Department of Religious Studies for all of the production assistance. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Wearing different clothes, probably.
I'm going to wear the exact same outfit every time.
From now on.
Yeah. Bye.